So if you want to get a view into EB Uncut, the Employer Branding Unconference by the wonderful team at the EB Space, Claire and Alex, I did some Vox Pops along with my fellow podcast host, Chris Murdoch. So here are my Vox Pops that I did with a few of the attendees to give you a bit of a feel for the conversations happening in between the stages. Let's get on with the chat. It's great to see your panel discussion today. It was around AI. What are your key takeaways or the things that really stood out from that conversation in your mind?
Yeah, I think it's probably like three things. I think the idea of AI ability to propagate your culture and to bring together people to talk about your culture and unlock that. I thought that was really interesting. Two, there was some fierce debate back and forth around whether AI was a helpful or hindrance, whether authenticity does it help or hinder. I thought that was, because I think that's pretty topical. And probably the last one was like, hey, what are the KPIs of AI? Is it productivity? Is it headcount? Or is it more, shouldn't be measured that way for the employer branding profession? It should be more around effectiveness. I thought that was quite interesting.
Actually, was it Matt who said something around AI giving more people a voice?
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about that, because I found that a really interesting part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think there's the people in employer branding, in lots of ways, they are natural storytellers. So from there, in our lens, is AI helping us to communicate easier, faster, better, if it's real, if it's authentic? But the reality is most people in a workforce aren't naturally excellent communicators. And
good point.
On that case, AI just able to unlock the ability for them to have any conversation.
Yes.
Or even just to have something where they're less scared to talk to their manager. I thought that was Matt's point, and I thought that there's way more of them in a workforce than us who are excellent communicators and do it for a profession.
It's true, actually. It goes back to earlier on around inclusion. Actually, introverts have so much to offer, but often it will be extroverts who will be getting the limelight, but actually to tap into the different way of thinking that you get from introverts, spliced with that kind of positive friction with extroverts, is fantastic. And that's what inclusion is, and that's what gives you that diversity of thinking, and ultimately the innovation and the stuff that you guys do. It's ultimately all those different brains and backgrounds in a room or on a Zoom call or in a meeting results in some pretty innovative work.
Yeah, and I think that's that point around that you're saying of inclusion being the foundational piece that you build everything off. Yeah. I think you could make a real case for AI being the glueware.
Yes, yeah, I like that. We're going to have to get you back on the podcast, I think, and pick on that topic a bit more, definitely. But thank you very much, man.
Yeah, awesome. Cheers, mate.
It does feel like onboarding is overlooked too often when it comes to employer branding. What are your thoughts?
I think so. I've listened to a few of the panel discussions this morning, and really interesting. I've loved hearing everyone's opinions. But yeah, we've mainly been talking about employer brand in the context of recruitment and attraction, and also about employees that have already been in businesses, maybe they're disenfranchised after a number of months or years. Yeah. But yeah, that onboarding piece is the moment when people are getting to know businesses, first impressions. It's pre-boarding, it's onboarding. So if you're not continuing their employer brand and thinking about how those employees are feeling once they've been offered a job, but maybe not before they've started on day one, then you are absolutely missing a trick. Absolutely. Because businesses are seeing much higher dropout rates, that's becoming the norm, and it really is as simple as making sure your employer brand is shining throughout that whole employee process, that whole employee experience. So yeah, obviously I would say that, it's true. But it's been overlooked, but it is true, and I think a lot of businesses I speak to are now finally looking at that. They feel like they may have got the internal comms sorted and the internal marketing piece. Maybe they've worked on the internal piece, then they've looked at the external, how they're appearing during their talent marketing and their recruitment interaction, and now they're finally getting to the onboarding. Okay, how can we piece it all together and make it all work?
It's the business end, isn't it? It's the business end of it. So it's pretty important.
I just think you're going to... How many times has someone joined an organisation and said, oh, that wasn't what I was expecting?
Yeah, 100%. And they've gone in 6 weeks or longer, or even worse, they stay for 3 years and they don't like it, and they don't offer anything truly valuable to the business and to themselves.
No, exactly. And it really needs to be as simple as communicating the authentic employer brand and the truth of what someone's going to be doing in a role, and what the culture is.
It's a nice word.
A great session this morning. I think for me, like one of the key things, we had resilience in the title of that panel discussion. And so, in your mind, kind of, what actually is resilience, and how do you manage your resilience?
Resilience to me is sticking up for what you believe in your vision and your EVP, if you're talking about it in an employer brand perspective, is that you go beyond just doing your job creating beautiful content, but focus on getting to your goal of creating an authentic employer brand. You know, authentic employer brand is never always a straight road, and it's not always comfortable as well. So you need to embrace and be resilient with your team when the pushback comes, because there will be pushback if authenticity attracts pushback.
In terms of that purpose, how does that really help when you are coming up against brick walls and obstacles?
I think if you got a good purpose, if your vision's straight, if you got your employer brand well thought of, then an obstacle is just part of the run and no longer something that you cannot climb, because you already know that you will run the entire course. So if there's an obstacle, just climb it instead of worrying about that there might be an obstacle or contemplating how you're going to scale this obstacle. You're just going to do it because you know where you're heading. And this is also what helps a lot if your organization has a clear purpose, because that steers your direction and your employer branding a little bit more as well. That helps you.
Actually, I find it really helps, because if you're doing things in your day-to-day that are a real challenge, or maybe dare I say it, boring, but necessary, having that clear purpose goes that, well, I'm doing this for a reason. Yeah. And it's an excuse to do the tough things, isn't it?
And you can also embrace the fact that a job is not only highlights. With one of my clients, I had a team member who was like boring down a little bit more. And I gave her more responsibility, and she had to do more things that she's never done before. And she said, my days I have higher ups, but I also have lower downs. But at the same time, it helps one, because now I feel that I'm in the right job again. Because this is what, it's almost a calling, being an employer brand.
True, it tests your why, doesn't it? It's kind of a sense check and go,
exactly.
Yeah, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing.
It is. You're constantly testing if your company, your organization is authentic as an employer brand. Because you make your EVP, there's things in there, and if they're not beautiful words, you should see them in action. If you don't see them in action, your words are wrong.
Lovely.
So, Roger, to EVP or not EVP, you were the chair of this rather, let's say, spicy discussion.
Well, that was the point. It was meant to be spicy. So just for anyone who wasn't here, the premise was that was the question, to EVP or not to EVP, for expert panelists. But they didn't know which way they were going to argue for and against until they were on the stage, drew straws, so 2 panel members had to argue against EVP, 2 had to argue for it. Obviously, this was a conceit created purely to encourage debate and make sure that we didn't have a panel where someone says something and everyone just kind of nods along.
Well, that is a criticism, isn't it, of panels, is that often it's just a nodding Churchill dogs and that's it.
So we kind of created this thing as a deliberate, so we had a protagonist and an antagonist, and even though it was quite uncomfortable, I think, for the antagonist to argue against an EVP, it did lead to some interesting debates.
So what was the answer?
Well, I think, Chris, that the answer was there wasn't a definitive answer, because I think the question was deliberately designed to sort of have a binary nature, but the reality is it's not a really yes or no. It's more of a it depends. So on the context, on what it is that you're trying to achieve, and out of that came quite a lot of good discussion about what, I suppose, if you like, what a good EVP looks like, and actually what it should do and how it should perform. And we covered all sorts of things from how does it cope in a crisis, how can it flex to a changing world, how long should it take to do, should it something that's cast in stone or something that needs to change, could you just do this stuff with honest storytelling, but then other people who are arguing for saying, well, yeah, but where does your honest storytelling come from? So I think where we landed was that you kind of have to stand for something.
Yes.
And the EVP is probably the closest thing that you get to standing for something, but it can take various different guises through both strategy and activation.
Absolutely. And I think for me, when that discussion was in full flow, my answer was it kind of depends. When I was thinking about it, is because you don't have to have an EVP to start
No.
You know, I think, in fact, it's great to be able to start, as long as you're clear about the business, the culture, and get the right people involved, actually, you can just then start creating content to then actually develop a business case and just go through the experience of doing that to then go, we need to have investment. Because I think often what happens is, well, employer brander's job shouldn't just be, oh, I've got to get a budget for 50,000, 60,000, twice as much, 3 times as much. Actually, just get started, especially in the world where you need to be really agile with things.
You absolutely do. The thing is, the reality is, very few briefs or things that we get involved in all involve brand new companies. Like, you know, never existed. Oh, we need an EVP. It's generally something that already exists. So something already exists. So you're kind of not always creating something from scratch. You're finding out what the truths are, the attractors, the realities, and then you're playing on those and trying to tell the story in the best possible way. But yeah, so it was an interesting debate. I wasn't there to have a view myself. I was there to facilitate it. But obviously, I can see the value in value propositions, regardless of what you might call them. I think ultimately your organisation needs to stand for something and gives people something to rally behind, and also is a kind of way of measuring what you do. You know, that is the thing that means that the employer brand activity you do, is it congruent with the things that you're saying as an organisation? I think that's just kind of basics for me. But
Exactly. Nice one. Stuff.
thank you very much.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers. Thank you.